This week has seen the African Union tell the military council in Sudan to hand over power to civilians within 60 days. And on a rather sad note, Tanzanian billionaire Reginald Mengi passes on in Dubai. Mengi is survived by a wife and 5 children. This is Africa Focus. Here's a peek of the stories set in store today.
Looking for a cure, high hopes for historic malaria vaccine in Malawi. 25 years after independence, we are in South Africa, where the country is gearing up for a general election, with many citizens complaining about inequality. Environmental degradation. Madagascar mangroves come under threat due to illegal cutting.
I'm Lenny Rashid, and our sign language interpreter is Teresia Oshira. Now, before we get into the main stories as usual, let's take a look at the news that made the headlines around the continent.
Rain is still falling after Cyclone Kenneth hit Mozambique, turning humanitarian assistance and rescue operation into a start-stop operation, the United Nations agency said. Kenneth slammed into Mozambique's Cabo Delgado province, killing at least 38 people, flattening entire villages and bringing relentless downpours that grounded aid operations and turned streets in the port city of Pemba to rivers. It also killed 4 people in the Comoros before smashing into Mozambique, marking the first time on record 2 powerful storms had hit the country in such a short space of time. It struck just 6 weeks after Cyclone Idai destroyed the port city of Beira farther south and brought deadly floods, submerging entire villages, vast swathes of land and 700,000 hectares of crops. It killed over 1,000 people across Mozambique, Zimbabwe and Malawi.
Malaysia on Wednesday touched nearly 4 tons of elephant tusks and ivory products as part of an effort to stop smugglers using the country as a conduit to China and elsewhere in Asia, a minister said. Authorities seized 3.92 tons of tusks and products worth about 13.3 million ringgit at Malaysian airports and ports between 2011 and 2017, said the Minister for Water, Land and Natural Resources, Xavier Jayakumar. Contraband ivory was burnt at a big incinerator to ensure it stays off the black market. Conservationists say Malaysia is a favored transit point for the illegal flow of ivory between Africa and Asia. Malaysian officials in August seized 50 rhinoceros horns bound for Vietnam, valued at nearly $12 million.
Benin's Electoral Commission has announced the results of controversial elections that were held without any opposition candidates, and saw a record low turnout just under 23%. All candidates contesting the April 28th vote came from just 2 parties, the Republican Bloc and the Progressive Union, both allied to the president. The small West African state was long held up as a model for democracy, but the main opposition parties were effectively banned from fielding candidates by tough new eligibility rules. Many citizens heeded opposition party calls to boycott the polls. The Election Commission announced late on Tuesday that 22.99% of the almost 5 million eligible voters had cast ballots. Turnout had never previously been below 50% since the country's transition to democracy in 1990. The results were never in much doubt, with the 2 parties participating sharing the 83 seats in parliament, the Progressive Union picking up 47 and the Republican Bloc 36.
Musi Maimane, the leader of the Democratic Alliance, says that the DA will provide more jobs for South Africans should they win the general elections on May 8th. Speaking at the final DA rally in West Cape Province before the elections, Maimane also evoked the corruption scandals affiliated with the ruling party, accusing the African National Congress of stealing from people's future. In 2015, Maimane became the first black leader of the DA, a liberal party that has struggled to shed its image as a party for the middle class or whites. It climbed to 24% of the vote in 2016 local elections and prides itself on good governance governance at municipal level, where it controls Johannesburg, Pretoria and Cape Town. Polls generally suggest that the DA will do well to win 25% of the vote.
A Zimbabwean organization has started exhuming the remains of victims of a government massacre during former President Robert Mugabe's rule, which claimed some 20,000 lives. Mugabe's regime deployed a North Korean-trained crack military unit to fight alleged dissidents in parts of the Matabeleland and Midlands provinces in the 1980s. According to rights groups, the targets were mainly from the Ndebele ethnic group, perceived as backing a rival to Mugabe, who is from the majority Shona group. President Emerson Mnangagwa, who took over from Mugabe following a brief military takedown in 2017, was State Security Minister at the time of the killings. He called for an open discussion of the Gukurahundi to promote healing. The National Healing Commission will hold hearing later this year to promote national healing.
Malaria is a leading cause of death and illness around the world. More than 90% of cases reported in sub-Saharan Africa. Scientists have spent decades searching for an effective vaccine. Late last month, Malawi started a historical malaria vaccination pilot program with the first ever vaccine made against one of the worst world global killers.
Malawi started a historical malaria vaccination pilot program with the first ever vaccine made against one of the worst global killers. Known as RTSS, this vaccine took 30 years to be developed, but the scientific community has been looking for a vaccine against the disease for the past century. Malaria is still one of the world's greatest killers, with 435,000 people dying of the disease each year, according to the World Health Organization, mostly in Africa, where malaria kills more than 250,000 children annually, and with nearly 200 million cases each year.
The world has been, for the last 100 years, looking for a malaria vaccine. And what we're witnessing today is the deployment, for the first time in history, of a malaria vaccine, which happens to also be a first vaccine against a human malaria parasite. So this is a massive success of the research community, producing a vaccine against the parasite, a vaccine against the malaria.
In Malawi alone, there are about 6 million cases each year, with 3,000 deaths, according to the authorities. The vaccine has passed through clinical trials, and after Malawi, it will be used in Ghana and Kenya in the coming weeks.
This malaria vaccine is very important for Malawi, because malaria is a huge public health problem in Malawi. We see about 6 million cases each year, and we register close to 3,000 deaths each year. And per day, I would say we register about 8 deaths every day. So it's quite a huge problem, public health problem in Malawi, and that's why this malaria vaccine, which has potential to prevent some cases and also save some lives, as a country, were quite positive about it, and they were happy that we're introducing this vaccine.
The World Health Organization is aiming at having 360,000 children up to 2 years old being vaccinated each year over the 3 countries for a period of 5 years, with a total of about 1.5 to 2 million children vaccinated in areas where there is moderate to high malaria transmission.
Because I had an announcement in my village that the hospital was vaccinating children against malaria. Malaria is a dangerous disease. When I saw how ill my husband was from malaria, I was concerned that if my children got ill from it, it would be much worse for them. I don't want my child to suffer from malaria. That is why my child is getting the malaria vaccine.
According to the World Health Organization itself, the vaccine is imperfect. In clinical trials, it was found to prevent about 4 out of 10 malaria cases, including 3 out of 10 cases of life-threatening severe malaria and 6 out of 10 cases of severe malaria anemia, which is the most frequent reason children die from malaria.
This is a really exciting vaccine that starts being deployed today with a modest efficacy, but one which we believe can be translated into massive impact. But of course, we want better vaccines. And so we are very keen and watch very carefully the efforts that are taking place in different labs and companies across the world to develop newer vaccines.
But the UN Health Agency insisted that when it comes to malaria, given the harshness of the disease, every means has to be used, and that the vaccine is a tool coming on top of others used to fight against it, such as the use of insecticide-treated bed nets and indoor spraying with insecticides. They are also hopeful newer vaccines will be developed following this first one, the result of a collaboration between manufacturer GSK Vaccines and a non-profit organization PATH, ministries of health from Malawi, Ghana and Kenya, and a number of other countries and international partners under the coordination of the World Health Organization. The pilot vaccination program is also aimed at providing 2 years of evidence and experience to see how it helps reduce the number of deaths among children, vaccine safety in the context of routine use, and if parents will bring their children in time for the 4 required doses.
South Africa often feels like two different countries chafing up against each other, one for the rich and one for the poor. This separation was legislated and legalized under apartheid, but post-apartheid, South Africa has struggled to bridge the divide. Today, the disparity in education, skill and income continues. 2 recently released World Bank reports further show that the gap is not only widening, but it's intergenerational. However, as the country goes to the polls, many hope that this inequality will finally be addressed.
It says the people shall share in the country's wealthy.
As May 8 general elections approach, South Africans who accuse the ruling African National Congress, ANC, of reneging on Nelson Mandela's 1994 promise of a better life for all have staged often violent demonstrations in townships that still lack basic services 25 years after the country's first democratic vote, which ended white minority rule. It was in Kliptown in 1955 that about 3,000 anti-apartheid activists adopted the Freedom Charter, a pinnacle document which became the cornerstone of the ANC's stated policies and the foundation of South Africa's much-admired constitution. The monument erected on a civic square of the 116-year-old township attracts thousands of tourists each year. But for local residents, the grandeur of the tower and its 10 surrounding pillars belies their suffering. According to the 2019 Socioeconomic Survey published by the Center for Risk Analysis, a policy research institute, the number of regular houses in South Africa has increased by a quarter since 1996. The number of people with access to electricity went up by 61%, and access to flushing toilets rose 30%. However, official statistics from 2017 show that 13.6% of South Africans were still living in informal settlements. More than a third had no access to flush or chemical toilets, and more than a half had no piped water where they live.
Our kids are staying in the shacks. What is the shack for? Spades and chickens to stay. But you expect a young kid going up from that shack.
She walks down a muddy street sporting a row of plastic, green portable toilet cabins and lovingly waves at a teenage girl stepping out of one.
Madiba didn't do anything for this community. And see what is written there, right from there. Nothing. Where are the free houses? Where are they? I become so angry when it comes to that.
49-year-old community leader Bob Nameng runs a center in Kliptown that aims to help unemployed and disillusioned young men.
In terms of service delivery, it's a foreign word to me. Kliptown, there was never any service delivery at all.
Nameng sounded very bitter, talking from the courtyard of his house, which features colorful portraits he painted of some of the country's anti-apartheid struggle heroes, including Winnie Mandela.
ANC has been in power for years. We all come from ANC with the same EFF that I'm talking about. We were all ANC. But right now, I don't want to hear anything about ANC because ANC has never done anything for me.
Nameng's home attracts many people with seemingly nowhere else to go. Around the corner, a woman who identifies herself as Johanna says she has neither a job nor a house.
There's no houses, there's no jobs. I'm living on Karabo's grant and Soli's pension. No jobs, no houses, nothing.
The government admits it has failed to fulfill the expectations of South Africa's 57 million citizens and says the anger of the poor is justified.
Coming up after the break.
A Smithsonian's exhibit in Washington, D.C. explores Senegalese women's use of gold jewelry.
We're about to pay some bills. Don't touch that dial. Keep it switched. Welcome back. In case you just joined us, you're watching Africa Focus. Today's sign language interpreter is Teresia Washira. Now, hundreds of displaced people from the Central African Republic fleeing anti-Balaka militias have settled in temporary makeshift homes along the isolated transient shores of the Ubangi River. Many fishermen have stories of friends or family who have been kidnapped or ransomed, while others have been forced to join the militia through a bloody sacrification ritual they call vaccination.
Every day, fisherman Matthias Kongba sets off across the Ubangi River in his canoe, hoping for a good catch. He's one of many displaced people in the Central African Republic. Hundreds have settled here on the river bordering the Democratic Republic of Congo, 300 kilometers downstream from Matthias's hometown in the Satema region. Over the past few months, these islands, which only emerge when the river dries up, have become home to temporary communities fleeing anti-Balaka militias. The armed group near Matthias's hometown is led by a man called Joseph Korogo.
It made me very angry that this man, Korogo, destroyed the school and the hospital. This Korogo, if he sees a canoe passing by, he sends his people to grab everything in the canoe. And if you pass him in the village, he forces you to go and be vaccinated using razor blades. If you refuse, he makes you suffer.
This so-called vaccination is in fact a bloody ritual in which fishermen are forced to join the militia. It supposedly makes a person invincible to bullets. The ceremony involves scarring several parts of the body after being given hemp. Another fisherman says he was kidnapped, beaten and went through the cutting ritual for 3 hours before he managed to escape. The local village chief, Francois Kokeyeke, tries to help new arrivals by giving them unused nets. But he says there are now too many people, which is affecting fish stocks.
Since the fishermen can't get big fish, they go for the smaller ones, which reduces the reserves.
Aware that their temporary island homes will be submerged beneath the river once the rainy season returns, fishermen like Matthias have no choice but to keep casting their nets until they can return to their homes.
On the west coast of Madagascar, in the Melaki and Menabe regions, are the island's largest areas of mangroves. They provide a habitat for fish, crab and shrimp, which are the main sources of income for the region's inhabitants. But this ecosystem is under threat due to illegal cutting in the area, found in the world's tropical and subtropical regions in more than 120 countries. Mangroves also filter water and shield coastal areas from the force of waves whipped up by cyclones.
In Mami's family, once a crab fisherman, always a crab fisherman. Earning nearly €80 a month, twice the minimum wage in Madagascar, Mami has had little reason to complain about his work, until now, as a decreasing supply of crabs is threatening his livelihood.
Before, there were lots of crabs here, but now there are fewer. I think it's because of climate change. In the past, the sea was very far, but today it's coming closer and closer.
Climate change may have had an impact, but so has deforestation. For the past 5 years, Mami has been illegally cutting down mangrove trees, a habitat for crabs and fish for the wood, which is also used for construction of huts or as firewood.
During high season, it's easy to catch crabs, but during low season, it's very difficult. so you have to find another source of income. Outside the village, there are people buying mangrove wood to build houses. At the time, I used to chop the wood to sell to those people.
Here, the mangrove trees have been totally decimated. The environmental consequences of this deforestation are grave.
It speeds up the erosion of the whole area because there's no more mangrove trees. It also speeds up the rising level of seawater inland because there's no barrier, since mangroves act as a barrier against erosion and strong winds like cyclones.
Mami has now stopped illegally tree cutting. Along with other villagers, he joined a reforestation program which has replanted 340 hectares of mangrove trees in the region in the last 6 years alone.
Marian Ashby Johnson lived in Dakar, Senegal for 2 years in the early 60s. The art historian would collect various gold artifacts worn by Senegalese women. These items are now part of an exhibition dubbed Good as Gold in Washington, D.C. that seeks to show ways in which Senegalese women have historically used jewelry as a means of fashioning a cosmopolitan identity of power and prestige.
A voluminous dressed women with gold thread, conical headdress and layers of shimmering gold jewelry, the centerpiece of the Good as Gold exhibit at the Smithsonian National Museum of African Art in Washington, is a modern interpretation of a seigneur, a woman known for her wealth and power in the 18th and 19th century Senegal.
On one hand, it means looking good, dressing up, but it also has this sense of moral worth. That you're showing your best self, that you're not only looking good, but that you feel good, that you are sort of exuding this self-confidence, this dignity, this sort of ability to sort of stand on your own 2 feet.
On display in the exhibit are more than 250 pieces of Senegalese gold and gold-plated jewelry donated by art historian Marian Ashby Johnson, who began collecting in the 1960s. Most of the pieces in the exhibit are not extremely old. Senegalese jewelry made before the middle of the 20th century is rare because women often opt to have jewelry melted down and redesigned to keep up with the current fashion.
These women were complicit by having these arranged marriages with Frenchmen, by being translators and cultural brokers. They were complicit with all the forces and powers that brought the French to Senegal, and that included the trade in enslaved humans. And we really do work to make that story as clear as we can to our visitors. We don't want to shy away from difficult stories.
The Smithsonian says seigneurs were renowned for their beauty and economic savvy, and that the modern-day women in Senegal still admire the approach to design. But there's a dark side of the seigneurs. These women who married European men often acquired their wealth from the transatlantic slave trade, and many owned slaves themselves.
It's nice to see that in a culture women were adorned and revered and treated well. I think that's the impression I get from this.
Despite this difficult past, museum officials said the exhibit does not glorify slavery with its focus on seigneury. The exhibition runs through September 29, 2019.
On Africa Focus, we love hearing from you, so make sure you get interactive with us on our various social media pages. Remember, you can view this program along with our wide array of other programs on DSTV channel 268. On behalf of the entire team here on Africa Focus and the wonderful journalists who make this program possible, thank you for keeping us company on this exciting journey. Do enjoy the rest of your viewing.